Forge, Chapter 45. March melted into April, and Valley Forge reeked of the foul stench of rotting horseflesh and the thawed privy trenches that had been filled by 10,000 soldiers. The noxious Missamia bird caused birds to fly around the encampment instead of over it. The filth in the air brought a wave of illness that stretched from camp to Moore Hall and beyond. The soldiers who stood at the front door were recalled back to camp because it was clear that the British were not going to invade Moore Hall, and so many lifeguards were ill. The fellows were needed at the headquarters. The congressman had complaints of the belly and bowel, and Mrs. Cook's limp grew so severe she could walk only with the aid of a stick. Isabel burned her hand on a hot poker, and it whelped yellow. My finger bones ached where the cold had bit into them in February. Gideon's cough worsened until he collapsed whilst powdering Mr. Morris's wig. His master sent a cart from York to fetch him. Isabel had several whispered conversations with him as he lay coughing on his pallet. She was almost tearful when he departed. I did not pray for his recovery. Gideon's absence made more work for me, to be sure, but I welcomed it. The day started an hour before sunup and continued long past dark, for General Greene received a constant stream of officers, messengers, reports and letters, along with the serving of meals and ordering of clothes and the care of horses in their saddles and other riding equipment. I took over shaving for Mr. Bellingham and the two remaining congressmen, Mr. Morris and Mr. Reed. General Greene was shaved by his wife each morning, though he occasionally asked me to repair the spots of whiskers that she missed. Bellingham's eager bootlicking paid off quickly. General Greene appointed him to the post of assistant quartermaster general, and with the chance to make a profit on goods purchased for the army. Bellingham had hoped that he would be given a commission in the army as well, and had already ordered a uniform coat, for his tailor had purchased a Maryland colonel's pistol. When he told me of his favorable change in circumstances, he gave no clue about what it meant for me and Isabel other than to say, saddle the general's horse and mine. We're meeting with the brigade commanders at the outer line. You will be accompanying us. We had 3 days of sun and cold winds, so the road into the camp was not too terribly muddy. In truth, I would not have cared if the mud had been up to my waist, for I had not been 10 paces away from Moore Hall since the night of General Washington's birthday ball. The camp was as busy as a city, with soldiers all hurry-scurrying about their business, some wearing coats ill-stitched from blankets, but a few dressed in the recently delivered brown lottery coats. The gentlemen of our company had a brief palaver of General Knox at the artillery camp. From there, we continued along the Gulf Road towards the outer line in search of a brigade parade ground. General Greene wanted to watch the new drilling techniques of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian gentleman in charge of instruction. I examined the face of every man and boy who passed, hoping he might be a friend, though I knew not what I would do or say if he were. I did not see a familiar soul. The men of the general's poor brigade were working on their marching techniques when we arrived. I led the horses to a group of officers surveying the confusion with a few hundred fellows in irregular rows of the field. Junior officers walked among them, trying to get the fellows to stand in their proper way and turn their heads to the south. It looks more like a dance lesson than a field training, General Lee said. Why aren't they drilling with muskets? The Baron feels like it's more important to get the men to move as one before they learn the new firing orders, explained the nervous-looking lieutenant. How long will it take them to train? General Greene asked. If you speak French or German, you can ask the Baron himself. General Poor pointed at the small group of riders coming down from the ridge. Baron von Steuben was a stout man who rode an enormous horse and was accompanied by a large dog and a group of gentlemen who translated his every word. The Baron loved America, they said, but he did not speak a word of English yet. The Baron bowed in the saddle to General Greene, then dismounted to chat with the junior officers, one hand on his walking stick and the other petting a dog's head. He wore a woolen blue cloak over his blue coat, but he had arranged it so that his medals, one pinned to his coat and the other worn on the blue ribbon around his neck, could be seen. He wore his own gray hair pulled back into a loose queue instead of a wig, and a black beaver hat that I was quite sure Bellingham was coveting. The Baron raised his hand, and the drums started beating. The soldiers struggled to straighten their ragged lines. The drum cadence changed, and the soldiers stepped. Some stepped to the left, some stepped to the right. One company at the back of the field spun halfway around. Baron von Steuben shouted, and the drumming stopped. A group of young men huddled around him. He gives his orders in French, mixed with a heavy dose of German. Those chaps turn it into English, explained General Poor. The orders were shouted, and the companies reformed their lines. The drums beat the cadence. Common step, called the officer. Step, 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 step. The Baron beat the rhythm of his with the walking stick. The lines moved as one body as the soldiers moved forward with the exact same strides. Step, 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 step. That's better, murmured General Poor. Right wheel, called the officer. Disaster. The soldiers again forgot which way to turn, and the field turned into a confuddled mess. The Baron snatched his hat from his head and threw it on the ground and stomped on it with both of his boots, shouting loud enough to be heard in Philadelphia. The translators tried the best they could to keep up with him, repeating his words in full-voiced English, blushing and fighting laughter, for the Baron was cursing. Not just the ordinary kind of cursing that can get your ears boxed if a lady is close enough to hear. This was a barrage of curses like I'd never heard before. His face grew redder and redder, and his hat flew flatter and flatter until he stopped jumping and shouting, goddamn, 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 which we could all figure out for ourselves. He put his hands on his knees and bent over to catch his breath. The entire field was silent. He stood straight and removed his cloak and his coat, handed them to the aide, then rolled the right sleeve up over his elbow and thrust his half-naked arm straight up into the air, his fingers wide open. He shouted some German words, and then, when they came out in English, they sounded like this. Soldiers who do not march together make an army of baby birds. The Baron ran along the front lines of the soldiers, brushing their faces with his fingertips like a bird's wing might. A few men laughed, and the Baron laughed too, seeming happy that they understood this point. He ran back to the front and thrust his arm in the air again, folding his thumb and each finger into a meaty fist, and shouting again, "Soldiers who march together make an army of steel." He ran the front line, waving his fists. The fellows closed their eyes as he approached, knowing that one of them would be punched, and he best take the blow without flinching. The Baron stopped, with his fist a whisper away from the first fellow's nose, and spoke. "You, my friends, are almost an army of steel. Your hearts know how to march together. Now you must convince your feet. Agreed?" He gently patted the face of the man in front of him, and they both broke out into laughter that spread across the field as the Baron walked back to the drummers. He picked up his hat and knocked it against his leg to shake off the dust. Wider, he shouted. Encore! Do it again, lads, repeated the translators. 1, 2, 3, 4. Step, 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 step. It took the better part of an hour, but the final drill, 400 men, moved as one, stepping, turning, wheeling, returning to position. My heart beat to the sounds of their boots on the ground. For a moment I forgot Isabel and forgot about running. I wanted to be on the field, learning how to be a fist of steel. The drill ended, and the Baron clapped his hands and shouted, "Bravo! Bravo!" stopping to pat the backs of every fellow in his reach. As the companies left the field, they did so in good cheer, with laughter and boasting. "'Tis unexpected," General Poor said, "but they do love him almost as much as they love his excellency." Bellingham said something then, but it slipped past me, for I was staring at the form hurtling towards us from the back of the parade ground. Ebenezer Woodruff was galloping like a three-legged cow and grinning so hard I thought for certain his jaw would break.